uh, starting to record, letting everybody in. But yeah, the good news is Joyce is definitely much more on the road to recovery. So yeah, it's been a long time. And there's the Schulmans. No, you can't. And there are the Schulmans. They're there. But what's the weather like in Dallas right now? It's pretty are you cold today? I think, right? No?
It was quite cold today and super windy. Yes, yesterday and today it's finally dying down.
Yeah, we heard there were some storms. Oh, did you know that? Philip just said that you guys in Texas are the number one wind production state too because of your wind. There,
Oh,
did not wind power. Yeah,
Yeah, one
did not
farms.
know that. Um, we've been trying to. Mike noticed this last. You told me the other day is that for some reason we're not able to stream properly on Facebook. I'm gonna try it again. It went on for 18 seconds, and it's been going on for like a magical 18 seconds, and then it stops. So I'm gonna figure it out and hopefully it's working. But yeah, it's not good. But Facebook has been having a lot of problems. A lot of people have been seeing it glitch a lot lately. I don't know why. It's weird. I don't know. You figure it out. But yeah, it's good to be back. And um, tonight we're going to continue with what we've been doing the last few weeks, which is reading stories about specific rabbis. Today we're actually going to read about Rabbi Meir, but not even just so much about Rabbi Meir. A little bit about, I mean, Rabbi Meir is the focus, but we're actually going to be reading a little bit about the people around Rabbi Meir because they're as interesting as Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is we read a few weeks ago. We were introduced to him. He was a student of Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, the guy we know as Acher, the one who we don't even call him by his name, right? He's the other. And we read about him because Meir continued to be his student pretty much as long as he could. And even though Rabbi Elisha told him, hey, go find someone else to study with, he was attached to his teacher. It was a very interesting relationship. And even when his teacher defected, if you will, went to the dark side, he couldn't let go. He didn't want to let go of his. So we're talking about during the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And why is that important? Because we know that Rabbi Meir, of the rabbis of that generation, and he's a little younger. He's a student of Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, and he's a student of after he's done being the student of Elisha ben Abuya, he is the student of Rabbi Akiva, right, who's a contemporary too, because Elisha ben Abuya and Aracher and Akiva are at the same time. So we're talking about right around the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, because Akiva is put to death during that time. So when we read about Akiva being martyred, right, the Romans tear his skin off of his flesh. The punishment was because, according to the Talmud, that he was teaching Torah, but there were other rabbis teaching Torah. So whatever Akiva was doing was more than just teaching Torah. He was fomenting insurrection because, first of all, we know he supported Bar Kokhba. The Talmud in other places says that he did. And if he did, and he was a very, if not the most popular and well-respected rabbi of all time, but definitely during his time he was. If he was supporting Bar Kokhba, that means that Bar Kokhba had a lot of supporters just by way of what was happening with Akiva and his students. And the Talmud kind of glosses over it, and it doesn't really talk about it because the rabbis don't like Bar Kokhba for the most part. They think he was another person who was getting the Jews into trouble with a power that they couldn't defeat. And so I finally saw Gladiator 2 on the plane, by the way, which I probably shouldn't have done on a little screen, but I didn't care. I had to see it, and I heard mixed things about it, and I kind of enjoyed it to a certain point, but then also said, why did they have to make this movie? The first one was so good, and this one was not so good. But It wasn't bad, but it wasn't like really didn't need to be made. And it really didn't cover. I always like there to be a little bit of history, and the history in this movie was really, really not historic. But of course, there's some great scenes of Romans destroying cities. And when you think of what the Romans did to Jerusalem, it's sometimes hard to visualize it. And these movies kind of make you have a chance to visualize what the Roman armies looked like when they went against a city and overran it. And so in the movie, in the gladiator movies, they're overrunning the Numidians in northern Africa, modern day Libya, that area. But in Gladiator, the first Gladiator, they overrun the Germans and people in that area in some of the battles. But this one, actually, you got to see them go to war against the city, against a wall, and pull down the walls, which was what they, of course, did in Jerusalem. So, kind of gives you a little visualization, a little taste of maybe what it looked like when the Romans were destroying Jerusalem. And that's the setting for this, too, because, again, the Bar Kokhba revolt was the last Jewish revolt. It wasn't, well, there were still little minor revolts, you can say, but it was the last revolt of that period. And again, that period from the destruction of the temple in 70 to 135, which is about 65 years, it's a generation, it was constantly rebellion. There was not like a very few years where there wasn't rebellion against the Romans by the Jews during that period. There was very few times. The Bar Kokhba rebellion was the most famous of those later rebellions, but it wasn't the only rebellion. And whenever it happens, the rabbis try to dissuade people from doing it. But some of their own people, like Rabbi Akiva, were supporting it. Rabbi Meir, who was Rabbi Akiva's student, did not support the rebellions in the same way. It doesn't mean he loved the Romans. We're going to see from the story today that he does not love the Romans, but he had a more maybe pragmatic view, which is let's not die. When do the Romans leave that area? They don't, right? So the Romans eventually become the Byzantines, the Byzantine Empire. They're the same people. They're just Christian Romans. And then they are finally evicted, if you will, really by the Arabs. They're first evicted briefly by the Persians around 600. And then they come back, and then the Arabs evict them. And that begins a Muslim domination of the area, with the exception of the 100 years of the Crusades, from about 1100s to the 1200s. During that period of time, it was controlled by Christians. But other than that, from about 650, 700 to 1948, it was controlled by Muslims, by Arabs and Turks, with, again, 100 years of Christians. Britain took it, yeah, you're right, 1918, sorry, but at the end of World War I. But the British never imposed their religion on Jerusalem, right? So I like to tell people that the Jews were the only people that didn't impose their religion on Jerusalem, but technically speaking, the British didn't either. The British allowed the Muslims to continue to run the holy sites. So it is fair to say that the British also didn't impose. They definitely gave Christians access to holy sites, because the British weren't going to sit there and let Christians be denied access to that, right? Which, again, sometimes Christians were, sometimes Jews were, but for the most part, the Crusades were an attempt to liberate Jerusalem, but for the most part, Jerusalem was not always off limits to Christians. For a long time, Christians and Jews, for most of the Arab and Muslim times, were allowed to pray and go to Jerusalem and have their holy sites. And the Muslims wanted them there because they were tourists, and there were tourist dollars that were coming in, and they weren't stupid. They wanted people to be there. There were some times when there was persecutions, but for the most part, Jerusalem, for the 1,000 years, people could come. They just couldn't assert their domination. They couldn't, they couldn't come between 1948 and 67. But during the British time and during the Turkish time, Jews could come to the wall. So when you see pictures of Jews praying at the wall, in the earliest photos from the 1880s or 1870s, when you see the first daguerreotypes and first photos, or you see paintings of Jews at the wall, that was during the Turkish time. Jews were able to be there, just weren't able to control it. They didn't. They had the little areas, but they had a synagogues, but they didn't have control of it. So today we're going to look at Rabbi Meir, and most importantly, the people around him, because he's almost Rabbi Meir is almost, I like to kind of think about it as almost like a Forrest Gump, because the people around him are all doing stuff, and he's just trying to just get through life. He's just trying to do his thing. What? Yeah, your namesake. And the name Meir means light, right? But yeah, but what's interesting about Meir, according to some traditions, I'm not going to show you the quote on it because it's just one quote, but there is a tradition that Rabbi Meir was actually a descendant of Nero, the Emperor Nero, who lived about 100 years before. Now, there's no basis for that in the sense that we don't have any genealogical evidence for that. And of course, Nero was not a great emperor from the standpoint of well, definitely the Christians didn't like Nero, and he's not held in great regard by the Romans either, for that matter. But there is a tradition that Nero or maybe some of his family were Jewish, and the rabbis actually had a tradition that Rabbi Meir himself was a descendant of that family. Now, if he was, we would have known, because it's only about 100 years later. It's not like it's 1,000 years later. It's like, he was born about 100 years after Nero would have lived, right? Because Nero would have lived during the time of during the time of Jesus, right around the time of Jesus. So this is like 70 years later. So there's no evidence for it. But the point that they want to make is that maybe Meir had pagan ancestors. Maybe he had ancestors who were not Jewish, which is what we heard about Rabbi Akiva as well. So the fact that there's these traditions that some of the greatest rabbis were not from only Jewish backgrounds is very interesting. Yeah, Philip. Sister or a wife, yeah. Yes. So that's according to even Christian sources say that. So I do believe, actually, might be a Roman source too on that. But whether or not Nero had connections or parts of his family were Jewish, there were definitely Romans who were converting to Judaism during this period. We know about it, and the Talmud talks about it frequently. And so we know that there's people who are. And there was respect and admiration that kind of went back and forth. The interesting thing about the Romans is that, again, it depends on who's in power. Who's the Roman emperor during this period, and the Jews knew that was, you could wake up one day and there's a different emperor, right? And it can change everything. And of course, it wasn't just the emperor. It was who is the procurator, who's the governor, who's the local Roman authority. One day it could be one guy, and the next it could be another guy. And it could be very, very different under one guy versus another. They could go completely different directions. So again, the most famous Roman governor of Jerusalem is Pontius Pilate, right? He's the most famous because of his existence in the Christian story, which, by the way, there is no evidence that Pontius Pilate ever met Jesus other than the Christian version of the story. But regardless, Pontius Pilate was considered by some Jews and some Romans as such a bad governor that the Romans pulled him not long after that incident with Jesus and took him out of the country because he was not good. He was very unpopular. And again, it's one thing to be unpopular. It's another thing when you can't rule without people going nuts. So he eventually got brought back to Europe. I think he finished his days in Switzerland or some part of the close by to the Roman, much closer to the Roman Empire. But yeah, Pontius Pilate did not have a great career after his stay in Jerusalem. His time in the foreign service did not end well. And again, sometimes people became very famous, like Vespasian, right? He became emperor after destroying Jerusalem and after going through this great conquest of Israel, which again might have been the reason why he did it, so that he would get the approval of the Roman Senate and the Roman population, who would say, here's a great general, he'll be a great emperor. And of course, his family did hold on to power for a couple generations. So this is Rabbi Meir's background. He's a part of this, and his family is a part of this. And I'm going to introduce you first to his father-in-law, because his father-in-law is older, is from the generation of Rabbi Akiva, and he's one of those 10 martyrs. And this story is a story that you've heard before. And so I'm going to share with you a little part of this story, because this story is Hanina's story, and it's also Rabbi Meir's story. And it gives us one of the best stories about Rabbi Meir and who he is and the kind of man that he is. So we're going to take a look at this story. This is from Tractate Avodah Zarah, which is technically about idolatry, but of course talks about lots of things. And this is from the end of page 17, and we're going to read into 18. And this is the story of Hanina ben Teradion, who is Rabbi Meir's father-in-law. We don't know much about Rabbi Meir's background other than, again, this legend of being being a descendant of Nero. But his wife, Rabbi Meir's wife, his name is Bruria. She is very well known on her own. She's considered one of the great sages, by the way. Even though she's a woman, she is considered a sage. And her father, Hanina ben Teradion, is one of the more famous rabbis of that period, partly because of his teachings, but more importantly, for us in our consciousness, his martyrdom becomes famous. And this is the story of his martyrdom and what Rabbi Meir does because of that. So here's the story, and I'm going to read it kind of its entirety, because normally people condense the story and only read part of it. They actually, by doing that, they almost miss the most important, which is what Rabbi Meir does. When we get to the part that they cut out, you'll see why they cut it out. So here's what it says. The Romans brought Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion, which, by the way, you can tell by his name. Hanina is a very Hebrew name, but Teradion is a Roman name, is a Latin name. So you can see that a lot of these rabbis, a lot of these Jews maybe they had a Hebrew name, but their father maybe didn't have a Hebrew name, right? So it tells us that there were cultural differences with children and parents, and sometimes the kids had a Jewish name, and sometimes the parents had a Jewish name, right? Or sometimes they had a Greek name, like Philip or Mark. And sometimes their kids or their parents had a Hebrew name 2,000 years ago. So Hanina ben Teradion is arrested, and they say to him, "Why did you occupy yourself with the Torah?" Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion said to them, citing a verse, "As the Lord my God commanded me," which is right from the beginning of Deuteronomy. It's from the part that we read right as we hear the second version of the Ten Commandments. They immediately sentenced him to death by means of burning, and they sentenced his wife to execution by decapitation. And his daughter was condemned to sit in a brothel, Kuba shel zonot. That doesn't mean she sits there. That means she's a prostitute. Doesn't she get? She's not there to watch. She's not there to count money. She's there to be a prostitute. It's a nice way of saying it. She was brought into a brothel to serve. That's what the Romans did. He's sentenced to die. His wife is decapitated, and his daughter becomes a prostitute. The Gemara explains that the divine decree that he should receive his punishment, he was sentenced to death by burning, as he would pronounce the ineffable name of God with all its letters as it is spelled. The Gemara asks, and how could he do that? And we learn in the Mishnah that these are the people who have no share in the world to come. One who says that the Torah is not from heaven, or there is no source for the Torah, for the resurrection of the dead. Abba Shaul says, also one who pronounces the ineffable name as it is written, with all of its letters, has no share in the world to come. The Talmud just said that Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion was killed because he used God's name. He used it. He pronounced the name of God. Now, that may or may not be the case, because, again, they discuss it here and say that he could have gotten himself into trouble for that. Now, the Romans wouldn't have cared. This is another example of that's not what happened. The Romans did not care. Now they could be saying that's why he deserved it. Like he's going to get punished for what he did. But it's not it's not what happens. That's why the whole concept of Jesus being executed by the Romans, because he was he would have only been executed by the Romans if he was fomenting rebellion, if they thought that he was a challenge to their authority. Whatever Hanina ben Teradion did, he did it and got caught for fomenting rebellion, which is probably, again, he supported Bar Kokhba too, just like his contemporary Rabbi Kiva, who's also killed. Okay. Gemara answers, Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion did it to teach himself, as it is taught in a Baraita with regard to the prohibition. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this part because, I mean, it's interesting, but it's not the point. And it's the distraction, if you will. It's a prohibition against sorcery. You shall not learn to do. This indicates, but you may learn to understand and to teach. In other words, certain prohibitions do not apply when one is acting only in order to acquire knowledge of the subject. So the rabbis posit that, yeah, he may have done it, but he did it not to make magic or to invoke God's name for magical reasons, but just to learn it, to know what not to do, essentially. So that's one possibility that, okay, so he did it, but he didn't really do it for the wrong reasons. The Gemara asks, rather, what is the reason that he was punished? The Gemara answers, he was punished because he would pronounce the ineffable name of God in public instead of privately, and his wife was condemned to execution by decapitation because she did not protest his doing so. From here, the sage is stated, anyone who has the capability to protest effectively the sinful conduct of another and does not protest is punished for the person's sin. Now, again, this is not the point, folks. I just want you to know this gives them an opportunity to say these things. But wait, what about the daughter? The Gemara asks, and why was the daughter condemned to sit in a brothel? As Rabbi Yochanan says, once the daughter of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion was walking before the nobles of Rome, and they said to each other, how pleasant are the steps of this young woman. So this woman was walking, the same woman was walking past the Romans, and they were all making noises at her, like construction workers, right? They were making noises. They were catcalling her, right? Upon hearing this, she immediately took care to keep walking in such a fashion that her steps would continue to be pleasing to them. She didn't stop, right? She liked it. And this is the same with which Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, said, what is the meaning of what that is written? The iniquity of my heel encircles me, a line from Psalms. It means the sins that a person tramples with one heel in this world, dismisses and pays no attention to them as they seek to lack importance. The way that one walks, come and encircle him on the day of judgment. So you think you're doing something little? No, it'll come back and get you. So they just came up with a reason why this poor woman has to now become a prostitute, which is that she wasn't acting demure. It's terrible, right? So I almost didn't read this because it's so upsetting, because they're justifying what happens to her. Because they know that she didn't do anything wrong from the standpoint of using God's name. They're not even implying that she did anything or could have done anything about it if her father did it. So again, they're trying to find reasons which are insane, because we know what the reason is. They were punished because they supported a rebellion against Rome. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is an example of what you'll see in the Talmud a lot. Justifications for things that you'll go, but that you're justifying something that doesn't, that's not the point. That's not what really happened. But it gives them an opportunity. And of course, they're teaching a lesson. And they're, of course, teaching a lesson to young women. Don't seek that kind of attention. Yeah, it's crazy. So here's what happens with Hanina ben Teradion. The Gemara relates, when the three of them went out after being sentenced, they accepted the justice of God's judgment. Now, this is a slightly different version of the story, but they combined it. The rabbis combined it. Why? What's happening? There were other people that got arrested with Hanina ben Teradion. So, which, by the way, then then what was the whole justification for why he got arrested? Because these other guys got arrested too, but just wait. We'll get to it. It's just that's where it says the three of them went out. This isn't his wife and daughter. This is these other people. You'll see. You'll see why. I mean, we'll get to it. We'll get to it quick. So don't worry. So Hanina ben Tradion said, "The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice," which is a line from Deuteronomy about God. Oh no, wait. This one is his wife and daughter. You're going to see there's other rabbis here too in a second. And his wife said, the continuation of the verse, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity. His daughter said, great in counsel and mighty in work, whose eyes are upon all the ways of the sons of men, to give everyone according to his ways. Line from Jeremiah. So the three of them all say lines of Torah as they're about to be executed. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, how great are these righteous people that these three verses, which speak of the acceptance of God's judgment, occurred to them at the time of accepting the righteousness of his judgment. So all three of them accept it. So that's the part about them accepting their punishment. But here's the part about the other people who got arrested. This is the part that listen to this story. The sages taught when Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma fell ill, Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion went to visit him. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said to him, Hanina, my brother, do you know that this nation has been given by a decree of heaven? Which means the proof is that Rome has destroyed God's temple, burned his sanctuary, and killed his pious ones, and destroyed his best ones, and it still exists. So Yossi ben Kisma says to Hanina ben Teradion, clearly God has allowed the Romans to do all these things. This couldn't have been done without God's sanction. Okay, so God, for whatever reason, whatever you want to say, God has allowed this to happen. And by the way, notice he doesn't say the Romans. He calls them this nation because they won't even say the name of them. That's how much they hate them. They won't say their name. So, but look at this point. So this is God's plan. And yet, I heard about you that you sit and engage in Torah study and convene assemblies in public and have a Torah scroll placed in your lap, thereby demonstrating complete disregard for the decrees issued by the Romans. So Yossi ben Kisma says, why do you do this? You know the Romans have said you're not supposed to, and you're doing it. And clearly God's letting them have this power. You're just asking for it. So again, let's assume that it's not really teaching the Torah that's the problem, but fomenting rebellion. Whatever is happening here, Yossi ben Kisma's attitude, which is the attitude of lots of the rabbis, including maybe Rabbi Meir too, is why are you doing this? You have a death wish. You cannot beat the Romans. God has let this happen, and you're going against the Romans. Again, whether it's religious, whether it's political, whatever it is, you're insane for going against them. It makes sense. I mean, look what Rabbi Yossi said. It makes sense. Look at his answer. What does he say to him? Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion said to him, heaven will have mercy and protect me. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said to him, I am saying reasonable matters to you, and you say to me, heaven will have mercy? I wonder if the Romans will not burn both you and your Torah scroll by fire. And Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion said to him, my teacher, what will become of me? Am I destined for the world to come? So Hanina ben Teradion says to Yossi, well, what do you think is going to happen to me? Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said to him, did any special incident occur to you which you might serve as an indication? Have you got any clues from things you've seen? Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion said to him, I confused my own coins that I needed for the festivities of Purim, which, wow, it's coming right up, with coins of charity, and I distributed them all to the poor at my own expense. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said to him, if that is so, may my portion be of your portion, and may my lot be of your lot, which of course is a play on Purim, on your lot, right? But except they use the Hebrew word, goral, that this is your lot. So if that's what you did wrong, if you think that's what you did wrong, I'd like to have that problem. So if you're being punished for that, or if that's the worst thing that you did, which is mix up your money, your charity money, he didn't spend it on himself. He said he gave money for Purim to the poor. It's not a close. I mean, the fact that the word Purim and poor are close in English is just a coincidence. That's what he said he did wrong. That's all I can think of I done wrong. The sages said not even a few days passed before Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma died of an illness. And all the Roman notables went to bury him, and they eulogized him with a great eulogy. And upon their return, they found Rabbi Hanina ben Teradyon, who was sitting and engaging in Torah study and convening assemblies in public, with a Torah scroll placed in his lap. Now, that story is out of order, because what they did is essentially they wanted to show you the connection between those two guys and the fact that Yossi ben Kisma dies, and as he dies, that's the same day that Hanina got in trouble for reading. Okay? So is there a connection between, again, Yossi ben Kisma dying and now him dying? This is what happens. I mean, this is the day he gets caught. He's going to get punished. They brought him to be sentenced and wrapped him in the Torah scroll and encircled him with bundles of branches. And they set fire to it. And they brought tufts of wool, soaked them in water, and placed them on his heart so that his soul should not leave his body quickly. And he would die, and again, the commentary is he would die slowly and painfully. So again, the Romans burned him, but the punishment was enhanced by putting wet cloth around him so that he would die slow. That's how insanely cruel the Romans are. So the Romans have a wonderful punishment, which is we're going to burn somebody, but it's not enough that we just burn them alive. We're going to wrap them in wet cloth so it takes longer, so they suffer longer. That's what the Romans did. So now you're going to learn a little bit of Jewish law. His daughter said to him, Father, must I see you like this? Rabbi Hanina ben Teradyon said to her, if I alone were being burned, it would be difficult for me. But now I'm being burned along with a Torah scroll. He who will seek retribution for the insult accorded to the Torah scroll will also seek retribution for the insult accorded to me. And so his answer is they're going to burn me and they're going to burn the Torah together. And if I'm not worthy of being avenged, the Torah scroll will. And that makes my death less painful for me because I know that these people will be punished for it. That's not the end of the story. His students said to him, our teacher, what do you see? Rabbi Hanina ben Teradyon said to them, I see the parchment burning, but its letters flying to the heavens. That's a very famous statement. And they said to him, you too should open your mouth and the fire will enter you, and you will die quickly. Rabbi Hanina ben Teradyon said to them, it is preferable preferable that he who gave me my soul should take it away, and one should not harm oneself to speed death. Now, that's a really important basis for Jewish views of euthanasia. Again, maybe not the best place to derive Jewish law from, which is a horrible scene of martyrdom, but this is considered to be one of the bases for understanding Jewish views of what we're allowed to do when someone's dying. Now, he said one should not harm oneself to speed his death. Now, it's a little confusing because of what you're about to see. The executioner, right, said to him, "My teacher, if I increase the flame and take off the tufts of wool from your heart, that you will die sooner and suffer less, will you bring me to the life of the world to come?" Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion said to the executioner, "Yes." The executioner said, "Take an oath for me." That is, promise, right? Make an oath. Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion took the oath for him, and the executioner immediately increased the flame and took the tufts of wool from his heart, causing his soul to leave his body quickly. And then the executioner leapt into the fire. That's the part of the story that people leave out. That's a part of the story that's mind-blowing on top of something mind-blowing. So Hanina ben Teradion allows the guy to remove it. He does. He allows him to do this. Now, what's interesting about this scene then is that the guy is kind of contravening Jewish law by doing these things, by increasing the fire and taking the tufts off. So he's kind of going against it, but he gets Hanina ben Teradion's blessing and guarantee that if he does it, he'll go to heaven too. Wait, I think the line, yeah, you got to hear this line. A divine voice, because people also cut this part off too. A divine voice emerged and said, "Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion and the executioner are destined for life in the world to come." Upon hearing this, Rabbi Judah Hanasi, right, the editor of the Mishnah, said, he wept, "There is one who acquires his share in the world to come in one moment, like the executioner. And then there is one who acquires his share in the world to come only after many years of toil." This is Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion. They're both going to the same place. Now, the story is very important, again, from the standpoint of Jewish law. It's very famous because people quote it as what is acceptable to do. It's not the only story in the Talmud, and there are no stories really in the Torah that we can learn about euthanasia from, what the halacha is. But this is one. This is one of the stories. There's another story, too, which we'll read about with Rabbi Judah Hanasi, about removing impediments to death, if you will. But this one's an interesting one because it is a direct impediment or a direct connection to what's keeping someone alive. I'm telling you that Jewish law to this day in 2025 on whether someone's allowed to be removed from a breathing apparatus, let's say, intubated, is based on this story. That's how important the story is. Again, you got to read the whole story, which is that the guy, the executioner, did it knowing that he was kind of contravening Jewish law, but he got to go to heaven anyways because he helped stop the suffering. Now, normally people aren't going to have a situation like that where they're going to be able to get somebody to intervene and by the way, this isn't the only story of executioners essentially doing their deed and then dying immediately so that they can get to heaven. Part of the lesson, by the way, the rabbis teach is that, look, you're not supposed to commit suicide in Judaism. This guy just committed suicide. How can you even justify that? So the rabbis would say, look, the guy's an executioner for the Romans. He's not living a good life. If he doesn't get out now, he's going to go back. What's he going to do? Interestingly, the story presupposes and just takes on face value. I mean, step back for a second. The executioner is a Jew. People forget that. The whole reason why the guy even wants to go to heaven, like the rabbis don't know what to do with that story. They don't like the fact that the executioner was a Jew. They somehow think the guy's like a convert who converts in one moment and goes to heaven, you know, in an instant, you know, in one of those deathbed conversions. Um, the guy's Jewish, has been doing work for the Romans, and he gets on the right side at the end of his life. But the story only works if he's Jew. I mean, okay, his story, you can have the story where he's not Jewish, but he clearly is Jewish. First of all, he calls him his teacher. He calls him my teacher. I wouldn't call him his teacher if he was just a regular Roman guy off the street, a Jewish guy. There's no reason to believe he wasn't, other than it makes us upset that there were Jews that were working for the Romans doing this kind of stuff. But they were tax collector Jews, and they were Roman Roman puppets like Herod. And there's this guy. We don't know his name, but he's the Roman executioner. So this story is very famous because, again, teaches us a little bit about that. It's also taught even at Yom Kippur, because we read traditionally the story of the 10 martyrs on Yom Kippur to inspire us to think about what people did for their Judaism in other times in history. And so there's a tradition of reading these 10 martyrdoms, including Hanina ben Tradion's and Akiva's, which are the two most famous, but there are other ones mentioned too in the Talmud. And they're kind of put together as a martyrology service. It's not done very often anymore. And if it's done, it's generally done in Hebrew, and it's not usually read in English. I don't think I've ever been to a synagogue where they read it in English, but if they ever did, they maybe would read the story of Akiva or the Hanina ben Tradion story, which was a much more graphic story. I mean, I remember hearing that story as a kid. First of all, they never taught me the part of the Roman jumping into the fire and dying, or the Roman executioner, the Roman executioner, the Roman puppet collaborator who also dies at the same time. They didn't teach me about that part. But they, he also committed suicide, by the way, too. But yeah, this story has inspired Jews for a long time who have been facing martyrdom, whether they were in the Holocaust or in the Inquisition, people who were being tortured and felt that their death would be avenged. And it's one of the things that we actually say in modern day Hebrew, when we talk about somebody who's been murdered, we say, "May God avenge their blood." And my friend Philip saw this with me about 5 weeks ago. This is the artwork in Sderot. Ooh, let me get this stupid thing off. This is the artwork on the wall. Right, the Torah is burning. Sderot is burning. And then you have the letters going up to heaven. This was painted in the last year. Right? This is for 10/7/23. Right? Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah. The day of this attack was the day of Simchat Torah. And there you have the letters going up to heaven. The letters are painted over the bullet holes because the Israelis had surrounded the police station. And there's the police station represented in art. Right there. Yeah.
Where what you heard when you were in Israel and you wrote and other Christians where some of these defenders, I'm thinking about the female first sergeant was on the roof. Instead of trying to escape, she fought until the end until she ran out of ammunition, which is pretty extreme. I mean, it's not pretty extreme, it's ultimately extreme. And I'm just thinking, they're not trying to save your life.
Well, when you're saving someone else's life, that's a different situation. Hanina ben Teradion, to some extent, some of the rabbis, again, Yossi ben Kizma, some of the other people who come up to him and say, "Stop teaching, stop doing this publicly." Again, was he teaching or was he fomenting rebellion? The point is that the rabbis rabbis. The rabbis traditionally took offense at people who jeopardized their lives. So if the guy was warned not to do something publicly and he did it anyways, he shouldn't have been doing that. It's a general rabbinic principle. If you save someone else's life, though, by risking your own life or giving up your own life, the rabbis say that that's not the same. You don't have to. You're not obligated to risk your life or to give up your life for somebody else. But if you do, it's not considered suicide. So if you step in front of a bullet that's going to somebody else, it's not considered suicide, saving someone else's life. You're not obligated to do that, but also, again, it's not considered suicide. So, again, when you risk your life for somebody, there's a understanding that you're not supposed to place your life in the place of somebody else's. But if you do it, you didn't do anything wrong. You just you save somebody's life, and that's, again, if you have a chance to save multiple lives, then that's also going to be considered to be something that is heroic. So Judaism looks at some of this as heroic, but they also want to be pragmatic and not unnecessarily risk your life if you don't have to. If it can be avoided, you don't die. The rabbis do have differences of opinion on how strong that's supposed to be. So, for example, if someone makes you worship an idol in front of everybody else, you can give up your life rather than do that. You don't have to. You can also, as some of the rabbis said, you can pretend like you're tying your shoelace, bend down, tie your shoelace. There's ways of getting around it but you're not supposed to. You're supposed to at least, come up with some kind of solution to not, but they don't want you to die, So, but yeah, the heroism of people who've done that, though, they're going to say the person's a hero. But that is from a year ago. That story is still part of our consciousness, and it made its way into that artwork, the Torah on fire. I see the letters going up to heaven. And that kind of irony, again, that Judah Hanasi says, isn't the world crazy? Somebody could work their whole lives to get to heaven, and then some people can get it in a moment. So, to answer your question, Philip, too, is that sometimes people do something so heroic that they go straight to heaven. But again, it's it's a tough one, right? And again, the rabbis really have a hard time with the suicide that the guy just committed. He committed suicide. So again, their answer would be, look, the guy had to, because otherwise he was just going to go back to doing bad stuff. It's a tough one. It's a tough one but again, he didn't just commit suicide. He committed suicide. They would have punished him for doing what he was doing. So he risked his life. He gave up his life anyways, and he gave up his life and he went to heaven, and it's not a happy ending, but it's definitely a Jewish ending. Now, it's been inspiring Jews for thousands of years, and hopefully we don't get murdered and get martyred, but it happens, and it happened last year. So it happened 15 or 16 months ago. Now, that's not the end of the story. So when I was a kid, they never taught us this part of the story, and you'll see why. Because we learned about what happened to Hanina ben Tradion. We don't only learn that much about his wife, but we learn about his daughter, the one who got sent to the brothel. Now look at this story, and this is where we get to see Rabbi Meir and Bruria, his wife too, the sister. Let's look at this story, because this is the rest of the story. This is part of the story. The Gemara relates, Bruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir, was a daughter of Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion. She said to Rabbi Meir, "It is a disrespectful matter for me that my sister is sitting in a brothel. You must do something to save her. I can't live like this. My sister's in the brothel, serving as in a brothel. You got to do something." Now, again, the rabbis don't like this story at all. She's sitting in the brothel. She doesn't have to work. She's just looking there, but it's bad enough. It really bothers them. It happened the same day, by the way. The rabbis are like, there's not even a day that goes by, and Rabbi Meir, so she never was humiliated. They go through such explanations on this that but it's troubling because it happened. It happened not just to her, but to thousands of other Jewish women that were thrown into Roman brothels, and men. Roman took Jewish boys. It says also in the Talmud that Jewish boys and girls were sold into sex slavery. It says so. There's actually a case of one of those ships going across where the kids committed suicide. Maybe if we get to that, we weren't supposed to talk about suicide tonight. It was not the purpose. It was to meet Rabbi Meir, but martyrdom and suicide is an interesting story in itself too. So my sister is sitting in a brothel. We got to do something. Right? So Rabbi Meir took a vessel full of dinars and went. He said to himself, if no transgression was committed to her, right, a miracle will be performed for her. If she committed a transgression, no miracle will be performed for her. I mean, come on. She's in a brothel. It's not like it's her choice, but, in Rabbi Meir's mind, you got to keep her pure. Rabbi Meir went and dressed as a Roman knight, but as a soldier, as a Roman centurion. And he said to her, I actually want to see what the word that they used here. This is a parsha, but he went to, we don't know her name, by the way, Bruria's sister, his sister-in-law. Accede to my wishes, which again is a nice way of saying engage in sex with me right now. She said to him, I am menstruating, dashtana, and cannot. He said to her, I will wait. She said to him, there are many women in this brothel, and there are many women who are more beautiful than I. He said to himself, I can conclude from her responses that she did not commit a transgression, as she presumably said this to all who come. Okay, I don't know. You decide. The point is that, again, the rabbis really don't want her doing anything bad. Again, it's not her choice, but she seems to be trying to get out of doing the work, right? So Rabbi Meir went over, and he said, if she's been pure, we're going to have a miracle happen. Rabbi Meir went over to her guard and said to him, give her to me. The guard said to him, I fear that if I do so, I will be punished by the government. He knows who she is, right? She's not just a prostitute. She's a political prisoner. Rabbi Meir said to him, take this vessel full of dinars, give half to the government as a bribe, and half of will be for you. The guard said to him, but when the money is finished, what shall I do? Rabbi Meir said to him, say, God of Meir will answer me, and you will be saved. The guard said to him, and who can say that this is the case, that I will be saved by this utterance? Right? So Rabbi Meir says to him, say my name and everything will be okay. And you say the God of Rabbi Meir. No, just say my name, right? It's not like, Jesus, which people were invoking Jesus' name during this time, by the way, already for miracles. It's not what happens. Say the God of Rabbi Meir. Well, but he says, how do I know? How you tell me this? I run out of money. How am I going to get taken care of? So Meir said to him, you will see. There were these carnivorous dogs that would devour people. Carnivorous isn't there, but obviously dogs that devour people are man-eating dogs. And they're not just every dog is carnivorous. These dogs were bad, really bad dogs. They ate people. They ate people. There Rabbi Meir took a clod of earth, threw it at them, and when they came to devour him, he said, God of Meir, answer me. And the dogs left him alone. So he got the dogs agitated. They ran over to eat him. And he said, God of Rabbi Meir. The guy says, right? After seeing this, the guard gave the daughter of Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion to Rabbi Meir. So it's all over, right? Happy ending. No. But he proves to him the miracle, right? He can do miracles. Ultimately, the matter was heard in the king's court. And the guard who was brought and taken to be hanged said, God of Meir, answer me. They then lowered him as they were unable to hang him. They said to him, what is this? He said to them, this was the incident that occurred. And he proceeded to relate the entire story to them. So they can't hang him. The miracles keep happening. So it did work, right? So they found out it didn't matter. They, then went and engraved the image of Rabbi Meir at the entrance of Rome where it would be seen by everyone. And they said, anyone who sees a man with this face should bring him here. So they didn't engrave his name so that they could all do miracles in his name. They put his name on a wanted poster and said, bring this guy to us. Right? Wanted dead or alive. One day, Romans saw Rabbi Meir and ran after him. And he ran away from them and entered a brothel to hide. Back to the brothel. Some say he then escaped capture because he saw food cooked by Gentiles and he dipped his finger in it and tasted it with the other finger, thereby fooled them into thinking he was eating their food. So he went over to some pot of clam chowder, stuck his finger in it, and then took the other finger and tasted it. And they were like, oh man, he can't be Rabbi Meir. He just ate, he didn't really. He just pretended he did. He put a finger in him. Because other finger, and they, oh, he can't be Rabbi Meir. He just ate trafe. But, some say, though, he escaped detection because Elijah came into the brothel, appeared to them as a prostitute, and embraced Rabbi Meir. The Romans who were chasing him then said, heaven forbid, if this was Rabbi Meir, he would not act in this manner. So he's hugging a woman. Can't be Rabbi Meir. So he escapes maybe because he faked eating non-kosher food, or maybe he faked by embracing a prostitute, who, of course, was really Elijah. So interestingly, Elijah, as we know, can appear to people lots of different ways. As a poor person, as a rich person, as ill, someone who's sick, somebody who's homeless. You didn't know that Elijah could come to you as a prostitute. Don't look for him there. Don't look for him in a brothel. I'm just looking for Elijah. No, but it does say that Elijah can come in a lot of different forms, including a woman and a prostitute. Interesting. So that's an interesting way that Rabbi Meir, who again has miraculous powers, is able to escape detections. It's not the end of the story. Rabbi Meir arose and fled. He arrived in Babylonia. So he went all the way to the Persians, right? Because the Persian Empire, the enemies of Rome, who he was safe there, right? The Gemara notes there are those say he fled because of this incident, and there are those say he said fled to embarrassment from the incident involving his wife Bruria. We're going to get to Bruria in a second, who's an amazing woman. That's the woman. It's the stories we're going to finish with today. But um, um, yeah, the Bruria story is a story that we may not read the whole part of, but Bruria, his wife, gets accused of having an affair with one of Rabbi Meir's students, and that's a difficult part of the story, but it's not the part we're going to read right now, because we're actually going to keep reading, because I want you to see one other really important thing in this story, which isn't so much about Rabbi Meir, but it really interesting about the Romans. And as I said, I was thinking about it because I just saw Gladiator, which I think seems to me that like it felt like it had a lot more gladiator stuff than the first one. Like they were more gladiator. They were in gladiator times more. Maybe not. I don't know. It seemed like they were in the gladiator arena a lot. It was funny because one of the bad trainer in that movie was played by Lior Raz, who's a Israeli actor. He's in Fauda, and he was not nice in that. They never say he's Jewish, by the way, but there were Jews and there were Jewish gladiators. So, but look at this story. This is the part of the story that, again, you also people don't usually read this part, let alone this part. This is the sages taught with regard to one who goes to stadiums where people are killed in contests with gladiators or beasts, or to a camp of besiegers where different forms of entertainment are provided for the besieging army. And he sees there the acts of diviners and those who cast spells, or the acts of clowns, known as bukion or mukion, or mulion or lulion, or belurin or salgurin, which are all different types of farce and perhaps forms of comedy that were considered to be very disrespectful. I'm not 100% sure exactly why, but yeah, we're not supposed to be in those places. This is called the seat of the scornful. And with regard to such places, the verse states, happy is the man that has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, right? This is a line from Psalms, right? Right at the beginning of Psalms, actually. Nor stood in the way of sinners, nor sat in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the Torah of the Lord. That's from Psalm 1, right at the beginning of Psalms. You learn from here that these matters bring a person to dereliction of the Torah, study of Torah, since had he not sat in the seat of the scornful, he would delight in the study of Torah. So don't go to circuses, don't go to gladiator matches, don't go to the amphitheaters. Stuff there is bad. It's not going to help you, and it's going to take you away from Torah. Okay. By the way, this is why there are Orthodox Jews today who don't watch sports, who don't watch movies, who don't go to plays, right? Because it takes you away from Torah. Not quite the only answer. There's another answer. I don't know if this can allow you to go to a football game or not, but maybe. Maybe. The Gemara raises a contradiction from another Baraita, another part of the rabbinic teachings, right? One of the Baraitot said, one is permitted to go to the stadiums because he can scream and save the life of a Jew. It doesn't say a Jew, by the way. I want to tell you. That's the commentary. It just says he could scream and save one who's going to be killed there, and is permitted to go to the camp of the besiegers because at times one can provide for the public welfare by petitioning the besiegers and saving the residents of the town, provided that he is not counted as one of them. But if he is counted as one of them, it is prohibited. This is difficult, as there's a contradiction before the statement about stadiums in the first Braita and the statement about attending stadiums in the second Braita. And similarly, it's difficult with the contradiction between a camp of besiegers in the first Braita and the statement in the second Braita. And again, what does it really mean? The Gemara continues. Granted, the apparent contradiction between one statement about a camp of besiegers and the other statement about a camp of besiegers is not difficult. Okay, It's low kasha, it's not hard. As here, the first Braita is referring to a case where he is counted as one of them, and there the second Braita is referring to a case where he is not counted as one of them. But with regard to the contradiction between the ruling about attending stadiums in the first Braita and about attending stadiums in the second, that is a problem. And here's kind of the kicker. Like more answers. The issue is a dispute between Tanaim, and it is taught in the Baraita in these texts. One may not go to the stadiums because they are considered the seat of the scornful. And Rabbi Natan permits attending the stadiums due to two reasons. One is he can scream and save the life of someone who can be killed, and the other is because even if he cannot save the man's life, he can provide testimony that a woman's husband has died, which will enable her to marry again. And so the rabbis kind of come up with, well, if you don't like the first reason, which is you can save a person's life by screaming for him, right? You say, tell the Romans to save the guy, right? They go this way. In the movie, they did this way, but it's really supposed to be this way, right? To kill them, to cut their throat. But in the movie, they do it the popular version, which is down, but up or like that. But point is that it doesn't even matter whether you hold your thumb. It's screaming for them. They would ask them, people, do you want them to live? And if they heard enough people screaming for them. But the rabbis say, look, you may not even be able to save them, but look at the mitzvah that you can perform by being a witness to it and telling somebody that you saw their husband die. Because now they can be remarried. They can marry someone else. Otherwise, no one would know. If there are no Jews there, who's going to tell whether somebody died? Now, that one you could argue is a Jew. But the other one, it doesn't actually say Jews. And by the way, if the woman's husband is not Jewish, which the rabbis don't really want to deal with, it's technically doesn't say Jews, that a Jew died. But again, the woman can get remarried and people know for a fact that the husband died because there's a witness to it. A witness says, I saw the husband die. So if he was just taken into slavery and they never knew, or somebody spread a rumor that the person was dead, they might believe it, but they wouldn't know for sure. And somebody comes forward and says, I saw the person die on this day in front of lots of other people. And now we have somebody who can testify to it. So it's considered a mitzvah. Yeah.
The rabbis back then could not conceive of Major League Baseball.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the problem is that part of their issue is anything that can take you in these matters bring a person to dereliction of the study of Torah. So anything that takes you out of studying Torah would be considered to be not important. So that's how they get to it. It's not so much, hey, a baseball game is the same as a gladiator contest. It's that you're taking away from time that somebody could study. Now, look, I see Orthodox people go to baseball games all the time. So they understand there has to be a balance between studying and enjoying life. But again, there is this understanding that some people have. If I have the energy to study, I should be doing that and not being engaged in silly stuff. Well, I don't know. I watched 4 hours of Reacher last night until 12 o'clock. So I'm an idiot, but I don't care. I was tired. I was really tired because I'm still jet lagged, but I couldn't stop. So there you go. I was not studying Torah. I had it in front of me. I had it opened up and I was watching Reacher. So there you go. But that's not the end of Rabbi Meir, and we want to, and definitely not Bruria, because I want to show you a little bit about Bruria, because that story, the kicker too, I could have stopped that at any point, but you want to get to that kicker, which is, you got to save somebody's life by being at the games. You can do it. Um, Again, the argument would be if no one went to the games, then there wouldn't be anybody. Well, the assumption is most of the people who are at the games are not Jewish, so they're going to happen no matter what. But that's the argument, like people shouldn't go to boxing because if no one went to boxing, it would stop and then no one would get hurt boxing. So football, whatever, put whatever word you want in there. But that's the argument. So this is a quick story that we also read not too long ago when we studied Brachot, the tractate Brachot. This is from the beginning, though, so it's a long time ago, actually, but this was the beginning of Brachot. But there's a very famous story about Rabbi Meir and his wife. And so we read this story, and I just want you to see it because it shows you a little bit about how brilliant Beruria was. Again, we know that her father, Hanina ben Tradion, taught her. She got this information. The Talmud, it's actually not in the Talmud. It's in a different rabbinic text. It's just a quick reference. We don't really know much about it. But it says Hanina ben Tradion had a son. His name was Shimon. And Shimon was a rabbi, but was so, I don't know what the right words are, but his knowledge was so much less than his sister Beruria that he was embarrassed, and he went and left and became a robber, became a bandit, if you will. He went to the dark side. He became a hoodlum, bad hoodlum. So it's a weird story. We don't know much about it. I mean, it's like one citation. It doesn't really say that much, but it's interesting. You see in one family all these different things that happen. That's why I say it's a little like Forrest Gump. But here's the story, the little story here, which I think is a really great illustration of how smart Beruria was. So there were these hooligans in Rabbi Meir's neighborhood who caused him a great deal of anguish. They were making a lot of noise. Rabbi Meir prayed for God to have mercy on them, that they should die. Rabbi Meir's wife, Beruria, said to him, "What is your thinking? Right? On what basis do you pray for the death of these hooligans? Do you base yourself on this verse? It is written, 'Let sins cease from the land'?" That's from Psalms. "Which you interpret to mean that the world would be better off if the wicked were destroyed. But is it written, 'Let sinners cease'?" It says, "Let the sins cease." That's what's written. One should pray for an end to their transgressions, not for the demise of the transgressors themselves. So ask for them to stop doing the things that are bugging you. Don't ask for them to be dead. So you can see she has a very powerful way about her. And let me just show you this little tidbit of what she does too. This is a very famous story from, interestingly, from Psalms. From Proverbs, which we just read on Tuesday. We finished up Proverbs. And there's a wonderful midrash on Eshet Chayil, that very famous section that we read traditionally every Shabbos for our women. A woman of valor, right? A valiant woman who can find, right? Eshet Chayil means so. So, look here. A valiant woman who can find. They said there was a story about Rabbi Meir who was sitting and expounding in a study hall on Shabbat afternoon when two of his sons died. Now, it seems suspicious, by the way, that two of his sons died, but let's just assume that they just very bad luck. They got some illness and they both died. It could also be they were killed, by the way, and they didn't want to put that out there, but they are dead. What did his mother do? She placed both of them on the bed and spread a sheet over them. At the end of Shabbat, Rabbi Meir came home from the study hall. He said to her, "Where are my two sons?" And she said back, "They went to the study hall." He said to her, "I scanned the study hall. I didn't see them." They gave him the cup of Havdalah. And he separated the days of the week with the closure of Shabbat. He said the bracha, the wine. He repeated and said, "Where are my two sons?" She said, "They went elsewhere, and they're coming now." She placed food in front of him, and he ate and blessed. And after he blessed, she said to him, "I have a question for you." He said to her, "Say your question." She said to him, "Rabbi, before today, a man came and deposited something with me, and now he's coming to take it. Should we return it to him or not?" He said, "My daughter, one who has," called his wife his daughter, but get the point. "My daughter, one who has a deposit with him, must return it to its owner." So he gives something to somebody. Of course, you have to give it back to the owner. She said to him, "Were it not for your consent, I would not have given it to him." What did she do? She grabbed his hand and brought him to that room and had him approach the bed and took off the sheet from upon them. When he saw both of them dead and laying upon the bed, he began to cry and say, my sons, my teachers, my sons in the way of the world, my teachers in that they would enlighten my eyes with their Torah." At that time she said to Rabbi Meir, "Rabbi, is this not what I told you? Do I not need to return the deposit to its owner?" The capital O. He said, "The Lord has given, the Lord has taken. May the name of the Lord be blessed." From Job. We read it yesterday. And as I told you, lots of people say it at funerals. This is the first time it got said at a funeral that we know of. It's a tough one, especially where it's used here. Over his children. Yeah. 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 That's exactly it. It says a woman of valor. So that was the art there. And again, Rabbi Hanina said, with this thing, she consoled him and his mind became composed. That is why it states a woman of valor who can find. Yeah. So that piece of art tells us that, the woman of valor for us remains kind of the inspiration for us, is what women are according to Jewish tradition. And interestingly, we read it in Proverbs a few weeks ago when we finished Proverbs. It's the last chapter, chapter 31. And the chapter, midway through gives us the women of valor parts. And then we, ironically or coincidentally, or maybe not, we read that part from Job yesterday. So it's pretty weird. Here's the line from Proverbs, right? So Eshet Chayil Mimtza, right? What a rare find is a capable wife. It's a little different than the translation of a woman of valor, but different ways of translating that. Her husband puts his confidence in her and lacks no good thing. She is good to him, never bad, all the days of her life. She looks for wool and flax and sets her hand to them with a will. Again, she supplies provisions for her household, right? So she's working. She's not only taking care of her family, she's also working. So this is considered to be an example of a woman of valor. So this story, and we do have a little bit of time to get to the Breweria story that is not my most favorite parts of the Talmud, the Breweria story, but I'll share it with you. So this was considered to be kind of, if you will, um, this is this is the one where you basically say, you got to be careful. So she lost her father, she lost her children. Her sister was sold into slavery, sex slavery. Her mother was decapitated. Um, and this is the um, this is the story of how she died, according to tradition. Not a great story, but here I'll just show you. And again, it's not one that so. Um, this is so part of the problem, of course, is that Bruria is considered to be so so smart that again she kind of gives her husband um um um, um that he he's actually humbled by her to some extent. So let me just show you. Wait a second. Where is? Let me just go to the original story. So when Bruria um, show you. I'm going to show you the story, and I think it actually exists in the Rashi commentary here. It's not in the because what it says is it says that he left because of the incident of Bruria. Hold it one second. Let me just get to the Rashi commentary on this. Hold it one second. Yeah. Here's the. I'll just show you this version of it. Okay. Um. Okay. Here it is. Uh, um, hold it. All right. So basically, the story is. Let me just see if I can find it. Um, I'll just show you a summary of the story. Um, yeah, it's in Rashi. It's not in the Talmud itself. According to the story, um, Rabbi Rashi explained women's minds weigh lightly upon them, indicates a lack of sexual inhibition. To vindicate the Talmudic maxim, Rabbi Meir sent one of his students to seduce his wife. Though initially resisted the student's advances, she eventually acceded to them. When she realized what she had done, she committed suicide out of shame. Others say that she fell emotionally due to shame, and a group of rabbis prayed for her death in peace. Rabbi Meir in turn exiled himself out of shame and fled to Babylonia. The explanation has no recorded source earlier than Rashi, who lived 900 years after Bruria. So, it's a difficult thing for us to even wrap our heads around because he seems so righteous. But it seems as though there was at least some rabbinic tradition that wants to have her have a bad ending because we shouldn't think that women, can be as brilliant as Bruria. That even, her weakness was um, again. I don't love this story. It's not a story that is in the Talmud itself. I mean, again, there seems to be a basis for it before Rashi wrote about it. But again, he wrote it during the Middle Ages. And again, there is the reference. It says the Bruria incident. It doesn't. Yeah, I mean, it's right here. I mean, everybody knows the story, but the story was used as a cautionary tale that women. I'm going to tell you the real reason. When people in the Orthodox world said, why should women not be rabbis? Now, Bruria's father is Hanina ben Tradion, one of the greatest rabbis of the generation. She's married to a rabbi, Meir, who's one of the greatest rabbis of the tradition. You just read the story of of her teaching her husband that when their sons die, there's a way to look at it that is these sons of ours were a gift from God in the first place. God's called them back. It's a very powerful story. It's one of the most powerful traditions of death that we have, of how to be accepting of death. So the woman's clearly brilliant. She taught her husband an important idea. And he also, of course, taught her this idea that you don't pray for the death of somebody who does something wrong. You pray that they change their behavior. So she's clearly a remarkable woman. There was then this issue. Why shouldn't this woman be considered a sage? Why shouldn't why shouldn't there be other areas? And so the story of her sexual promiscuity then becomes the cautionary tale that women will do this if given the opportunity. So that's the problem. Obviously, the story is used as a way to justify women not having that kind of role. And again, it's part of this this crazy idea that that men, because men can't control themselves, and that to some extent women can't control themselves, that's how it happens. That's again. So it's a crazy story from the standpoint that there's nothing in her life that seems to indicate that she would do that. Excuse me, but there is this cryptic reference that we saw where it says that there was something that caused Rabbi Meir to flee to Babylonia. So because of that, he allows for speculation that something happened in this marriage. Well, I mean, it says Bruria, it doesn't say what. I mean, could have been anything, but again, in the imagination, or again, the legend of that is what you have. So, and again, if you look, there exists a tradition among Orthodox rabbis to name their daughters Bruria as an assertion of her righteousness. So, if she was not a good person, people continue to see her as a example of, something that we should aspire to be. So, yeah, I never named any of my daughters Bruria, but it's kind of a tough word. It's kind of a tough word to say in English, and it also sounds like a brewery or something. But yeah, I mean, she's considered to be. It was a common name for Jewish women. Um, and occasionally, occasionally I'll meet a woman named Bruria, which that somebody thought she was going to be smart. And again, she's the one who inspired her husband to go rescue the sister in the first place, which technically speaking, you can make the argument that Rabbi Meir should have done it in the first place. It was his sister-in-law, and he should have done something to stop her from being humiliated. So she is an interesting person, and Rabbi Meir is again, I think, an interesting person because we see his relationship. We didn't go back and restate the story with Rabbi with Acher, with how he continues to be connected to his teacher even after his teacher leaves. So he's an interesting guy, but again, almost because of the people around him, more than anything else. But he's very, very, very frequently quoted. Rabbi Meir is quoted some ridiculous, a ridiculous amount of times. It's really only second to Rabbi Akiva. He's quoted, yeah. He's the second most frequently mentioned sage in the Mishnah. He's mentioned over 3,000 times in the Talmud. So, and his wife, as we said, one of the few women cited in the Gemara as a teacher, as somebody who we can quote. So, again, an example of one of those guys. Now, next week we're going to be reading about another one of these remarkable scholars who, yes, I'm here next week. On the 18th. Yes, I know. I know. I'm in England for my father in law's birthday, which also means I'm in shul for 3 days straight. Seriously. We're doing a Friday night, Saturday, and then a Sunday event at the shul. So I will be in synagogue in England for the whole time. I'm not saying it's not going to be fun, but I had my vacation already. That's all I'm going to say. And it's a good to honor. It's good to honor him. So yeah. So Wednesday we're going to be continuing. What? Yeah. So we're going to we're going to have a chance to read about the next rabbi that we're going to be reading about is also an interesting. Wait, where's? Oh, I'll tell you what it is. Put it in here and put it on my other computer. It is the time where we're going to be looking at. We are going to be looking at. Oh, we're going to be looking at some of the. My brain is not working right now. We're going to be looking at the other martyrs. We're going to be looking at suicide and martyrdom. I realized that we were not going to be able to get to it today, but we've looked at Rabbi Kiva and we looked at Rabbi Hanina ben Teradion, but we're going to see it in the full context. So we are going to talk about martyrdom and what the Talmud says about it. Now it sounds pretty grim and pretty sad, but look, we read two stories about the rabbis who were willing to give up their lives, and in the coming next week we'll read about some of the other people who either have to do that or don't have to do it, and we're going to look at some of those stories, as I said, that tell us a little bit about what life was like under the Roman times. And so we also can take away from it that, as you'll see, and as we know from Roman accounts, that the whatever happened to Jesus during his martyrdom, his passion, the way that that's elevated in the church, there are similar stories in Judaism, and obviously, most importantly, this occurred many times in the Roman province of Judea. This was not a unique situation. Jesus' story. As a matter of fact, we know that because in Jesus' own story, it says that there were other people that were crucified with him. And to some extent, there were some people who were not crucified with him, who maybe would have been crucified with him, that were, according to the story, forgiven. But the point is that the story tells us that Jesus was one of many people that was crucified on that day, according to the Christian story. So we might take a look a little at what the Christian story, how the Christian story, maybe I'll just show you how it differs a little bit, or how it's similar or different from the way that we have these martyrdoms in Judaism, which, yeah, it's not happy necessarily, but it is important. And I think it is definitely relevant because there is no question that we saw some of this in the last year and a half. News stories of Jewish martyrdom, as Philip said, a young police officer who gave up her life, and the story that we heard at Be'eri of a man who fought to save the kibbutz around him. And Israel is built on those stories. Modern Israel is built on those stories, going back to the Yeshuv, to the first settlers who came there. Some of the kibbutzim are named after some of those people who died in the pogroms of 1929, and some of the kibbutzim that were attacked by Arabs before Israel even existed. And again, unfortunately, we saw that many people were unfortunately realized that, again, in our own day, as Dara Horn wrote, people love dead Jews. So we have to remember that, and at least in some ways we give it some type of context and some type of meaning that is beyond just death, obviously. But we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it next week. Something to look forward to. Something to look forward to. but hopefully not something that we have to actually ever look forward to in our lives, because we get to hopefully all live and die in peace. So take care, everybody. We'll see you next week, and God willing, we'll have some of these people return back to us in good health, like Joyce, maybe even.
Yeah.
Yes.
If she hasn't had too much that week. All right, everybody, take care and get ready for Purim. It's
Thank
supposed
you,
to be,
Rabbi.
supposed to be happy.
Thank
It's a
you,
bad.
Rabbi.
All right.